Hello everyone, welcome to Caroline Nutrition. This is episode 10, Reversing Diabetes. I'm your host Ian Cath, and I'm the one with the interesting questions to help us have the best that food has to give, health, vitality and enjoyment. And to help me make some sense of all the information out there, I'm joined with Caroline Scott, nutritionalist and dietitian, and the person with the answers to your questions. Caroline, how are you today?
I'm good, thanks Ian. How are you going?
I'm well until I saw this title in front of me. You want to use LCHF. I haven't mentioned that, everybody. Reversing diabetes with the LCHF diet she wanted me to use. I don't even know what the LCHF diet is. But you're going to tell us, aren't you?
Yes, I am. Low carbohydrate, healthy fat diet.
Okay, well, let's just call it reversing diabetes and we'll dig into that in a moment, whatever it is. It's supposed to be a diet to end all diets, you reckon. But anyway, how are you? You've been a bit crook, haven't you?
We don't tell them all that.
Oh, well, that's why there was, that's why.
I had a cold. And my voice sounded like Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, well.
So we couldn't record last week.
Okay, well, hopefully this will make up for it.
Yeah.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about reversing diabetes, but it's a little bit deeper and bigger than that. So let's say, is this the diet to win over everybody? Is this the last diet that we need worry about?
Oh, well, maybe. I mean, I actually don't believe there's one single diet to suit every single person on this planet. But certainly I think there are things that as humans we should not be eating. And last episode, remember we primed this because we were talking about sugar and its terrible impact on the human body and what it does. We talked about how it creates inflammation and how its potential for gaining weight and metabolic syndrome, which leads to diabetes and even Alzheimer's, etc. So removing sugar from the diet is, I think, very reasonable and appropriate to help improve our healthcare outcomes. And so that's where the low carbohydrate, healthy fat diet comes from, is by removing effectively sugar and refined sugar. But it does go a little bit deeper than just that. So it's not necessarily enough just to take the sugar out of our hot drinks, and it's not just enough to stop eating lollies and chocolates and pastries. In fact, the latest research is suggesting that as well as removing sugar from our plates, we need to actually reduce the insulin response in our body. And insulin responds to the simple sugars that are created when we consume an excess of carbohydrate foods. So remember in the last podcast we talked about how sugar is digested. Yeah. So you have some simple and complex carbohydrates. So it's not just about sugar itself as in the natural form of glucose, but it's about how that sugar exists in certain foods that we eat, which we know commonly as carbohydrate foods. So for example, bread and pastries and grains, so whether that's rice or pasta, wheat, that type of thing. When these foods are consumed, they create inflammation in the body generally because there is an awful lot of simple sugars that are created from their digestion. And that puts our insulin levels too high, which again causes more inflammation.
Now, we went over this in quite a bit of detail last time, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. We did. And that's why we then promised that we were going to move on to this subject, which was kind of going to finish off the conversation. But this is the low carbohydrate diet. And it's pretty topical at the moment. It's another reason I wanted to bring it up, because it is topical. And for those people who really love to stay on top of what's the latest and what's the fad, what's going on out there, what are most people talking about, this is it. And it's not just a low carbohydrate diet, because we've been doing that for years and years and years previously, and it's been shown that just a low carbohydrate diet is not sustainable. You end up being starving hungry and then gorging yourself later on, and it's really not effective.
So the classic old rabbit diet of just eating salads basically just leaves you famished and
Oh, yeah, and in starvation. And then your body wants your blood sugar levels are all over the place. So you end up eating anything that's not bolted down or can't run away from you. So, no, this time they've realised and they've been working with, and when I say they, I mean there are lots of research scientists around the world working on, and they were coming at it from a position of working on reversing and reducing diabetes. So everything's kind of fallen together, if you like, rather than them working purely on, say, a low carbohydrate diet. What they've been looking at is what diet works in reducing diabetes in the human body. And what they fell into and what they've discovered is this low carbohydrate diet. But in order to make that low carbohydrate diet sustainable, they've added in extra healthy fat. Now, some people are calling it a high fat diet, and it's not that. I mean, for some people who don't eat much fat, it will seem like a higher fat diet because they need to eat a little bit more, but it's particularly healthy fats. So it's the low carbohydrate healthy fat diet, and that's been run so many experiments on it. There's a particular guy over in Newcastle in the UK, Dr. Ron Taylor, and he's just published, which is brilliant because he's shown that the work he's doing at the moment is reversing diabetes, and he is using this low carbohydrate healthy fat diet to do that. And he's not the only one. There are other labs around the world that are beginning to show this result. So it's very exciting research. I actually think, for people who want to know what's the latest thing, this is it. And the low carbohydrate diet, healthy fat, is here to stay.
You keep talking about healthy fats. Could we just remind everybody what you mean by healthy fats? Because remember, we were coming out of this era where fat was the great demon, and other things like sugar wasn't, and simple carbohydrates weren't really a problem. So remind people what are healthy fats and what are not healthy fats, because that definition is really important, isn't it?
It is, and that's a great point to make, that healthy fats, and we have discussed this in the podcast, can't remember which one, we'd have to look back through them. We've covered fats and fats for the brain and healthy fats and cooking with fat, but particularly what we're talking about in regard to this diet, healthy fat, it means pretty much the same. We're going to be repeating ourselves. Healthy whole foods. So foods that come as close to their form in nature as possible. So things like avocado, raw nuts and seeds, olives. It might be flesh-based foods like eggs and meat, chicken, fish, and the oils that come from fish. Those are the healthy fats that we're talking about. So whole foods, compared to and reducing, and we've talked about this before, any damaged fats, so deep fried foods, margarines, fats that have been created through severe processing, whether that's trans fatty acids or homogenization, hydrogenation, that type of thing. They're not healthy fats. But the fats that come from nature, they're the fats that we're talking about including here.
So the fats that require simple processing, like you squash an olive and there you've got olive oil, or you render it down, you cook your steak and you've got a little bit of fat left over, and that's good enough.
Yeah, and you eat the steak. You don't cut the fat off the steak. Yeah, it's that kind of thing. So the fat that already comes in a whole food. Yeah, and of course one of the reasons that it's included in the diet, because in order to reduce diabetic markers in the body, we have to rethink the way we see diabetes. And diabetes really, I was talking to someone the other day, a doctor, and we were saying how diabetes really is a carbohydrate intolerance. People can't tolerate carbohydrate, and so it totally screws up their whole blood glucose and insulin balance.
Well, you're talking about here an extreme amount of carbohydrates, because we can process the appropriate level of carbohydrates.
No, if someone's diabetic, you can't.
Oh.
And that's what we're talking about in diabetes. It's different to your normal population. So if you're not diabetic, yes, of course, you have a fair tolerance of carbohydrate foods. But if you're diabetic, you have a very, very low to no tolerance of carbohydrate foods. And so it would make...
Diabetics actually have a problem with rice and pasta and bread and those sorts of carbohydrate foods, as well as sugar, which we all know about.
Oh, yes, they have a problem with everything. And
I've never considered that.
Well, the point is, and this is what's so ridiculous, is that diabetic care in this country to this date has been to get people to count their carbohydrates, and then they take insulin accordingly. Now, what more ridiculous situation could there possibly be? why don't we just reduce the amount of carbohydrates coming in? Therefore, we can reduce the amount of insulin that they need in order to correspond to the amount of carbohydrate they're consuming. Remembering that what's causing the disease state and what's causing ongoing disease process for diabetics are high insulin levels, because that's behind the high inflammation, which, remember, we've said all this before, is getting into the brain and causing Alzheimer's and other disorders. So it makes complete sense to everybody that we reduce the insulin that's going on in the body. And by doing that, we have to reduce the carbohydrate. So Dr. Ron Taylor, for example, in the UK that I just mentioned previously, he actually started reducing carbohydrate radically. Now, he reduced caloric content to start with, and then he found that really wasn't sustainable. People can't eat just 500 or 600 calories a day. It's huge. It feels like starvation, and you just can't cope with the sugar cravings. So what they've fiddled around with is that they've realised if they've reduced carbohydrate to such a small extent, you can afford to have some more protein and some fat in the diet, which helps to keep your energy levels up. It helps to keep you really vital and alert during the day, and it also balances out those levels so that you don't get sugar cravings. So now eating a really low carbohydrate diet is sustainable. You can manage to do it through the day because you're not feeling at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that you need to either go and have a nap or have a shot of something in the arm to keep going. So putting these things together with the low carbohydrate diet is actually creating a really sustainable, low inflammatory diet, which all of us really should be pursuing. This would be great for everyone's health, whether you're diabetic or not. But of course, we're coming at it from the idea of reversing diabetes first and foremost.
I've got an understanding that for people who've got diabetes, this is a really important issue, and for their families. But I don't have anybody in my family with diabetes. Why do I care?
Well, you only care because it's going to help people with diabetes for sure, but it's also going to help anyone that might have an impact with inflammation in the diet and in the body. And as we've discussed before, that's a huge number of people. Arthritic conditions, any kind of inflammatory conditions, any kind of brain conditions. There are all sorts of things that are connected to high insulin levels, cancer even as well. So it's because insulin in the body is inflammatory, and it promotes the increase of other levels of other hormones, and that can actually be a dangerous state for the body. So it's, unless you're someone who's exercising intensely, you're not going to be managing these high levels of hormones and insulin effectively, and it's going to be causing damage to the body. Even if it doesn't become diabetes for you, it could potentially become something else. Plus, I mean, have a think about this. Just on its own, aside from just, Uncle Jane, Auntie Jane who's got diabetes alone is set to cost this country billions of health dollars. And in fact, the World Health Organization has been warning us globally, not just here in Australia, but globally, that diabetes is set to create this global burden of disease that we just cannot afford if we do nothing about this. And it's kind of like, I call it, it's the biggest train crash on the horizon, and there's no one really talking about it.
And I take it it's not just Australia, is it? It'd be all the West. It's
global, but it's primarily the West where we have the highest level of diabetics. And look, just by reducing diabetic medication alone, these bills are slashed. It is really that simple. And so if people were encouraged to reduce their diabetes, even just to a small point of getting off 1 or 2 medications, then it's going to save us billions of dollars. Now, I know that sounds terrible because we're making it an economical position, but sometimes that's the only way to fight these battles. For me, it's a huge emotional burden when you or someone in your family has diabetes, because the end stage of diabetes is dire. So to actually, we need to actually limit this, and we need to stop the train now. And if this is a way to do it, to encourage and to incorporate this as our diabetic education through the country, is to change our diets, then how simple and cost effective is that? I can't think of a cheaper way to do it.
Okay, and why is this not being embraced? Why? I'd imagine that there must be all sorts of nutritionalists, dietitians, doctors, pharmacists who are encouraging people to go this way, aren't there?
Yeah, you would think that, wouldn't you? Wouldn't that make complete sense? But sadly, and I can't really, without being too cynical, I can't answer your question. Here in Australia, we're not actually embracing this new science. And we're embracing other things, and in actual fact, in Australia, currently the practice is to punish practitioners that suggest this way of being, or even to suggest that diabetes can be reversed and resolved or reduced using diet. And it seems to be that responsibility for nutrition advice in Australia is a very closely guarded privilege, and the only anointed ones apparently are dietitians.
Oh, well, that's you. So
Well,
all good.
It is all good. And I embrace new science. It's something that I'm always looking up for new research. Sadly, not everyone is. But even,
But isn't it obvious for dietitians out there to say, yep, this is the way to go?
It so should be, and it is in other countries. I mean, I'm in contact with dietitians in New Zealand, in the UK, and in Canada, and they are embracing this. And in fact, Diabetes UK, so the diabetes education program they have running in the UK, have embraced it beautifully, and they are getting amazing responses and results. But here in Australia, we're not, and it really bothers me. And in actual fact, not only are we not embracing it, we're actually punishing people for openly speaking about it. So here you go, we might actually get a kickback from this. But I find it disgraceful. There was a recent fracas that was brought to my attention. There's an orthopaedic surgeon called Dr. Gary Fechter in Tasmania, and he has currently been hauled up in front. He's an orthopaedic surgeon, as I said, and he's been hauled up in front of his regulatory body because he's been overheard giving dietary advice to his patients. As an orthopaedic surgeon, he spends an awful lot of his time amputating the limbs of his patients from their diabetes. And so he got so sick of having to do this and so disheartened, he started giving some really simple dietary advice that would help to prevent this and circumvent this, which to you and me sounds like the most sensible and honest thing to do.
A complete no-brainer.
No-brainer. So he's telling his clients and his patients and suggesting to them that they reduce their sugar in their diet. Now, he's not even talking about an elimination diet. He's not even as hardcore as I am. He's saying reduce their sugar. He's been overheard, mind you. I have to say he's also been apparently making a nuisance of himself in Tasmania, trying to get the hospitals to improve their nutrition. Good luck with that one.
Well, that sounds like a good idea to me.
It sounds like a great idea. I'm not quite sure that's ever going to happen. Pink elephants might fly first, never mind the pigs. But honestly, so he was overheard giving this advice, and he's been dobbed in to his regulatory board, which have hauled him up. It's taken them 2.5 years of intimidation, bullying and harassment to finally come out with the proclamation that he can no longer give dietary advice, but they don't mind if he continues to cut off people's arms and legs.
But he's a doctor, so he's actually qualified to give this advice.
He should be qualified to give this advice, and you would think that he is. When you consider it, medical education in this country does not include anywhere near enough nutrition education. I could even go as far as to say it includes very little, and that would be closer to the truth. But beside that, they do study some biochemistry, so nutritional education should be fairly obvious from that. And they're medically trained people, so you would think that they would follow the latest research as well. But as it happens, that no, doctors in this country are not allowed to give nutritional advice. Only dietitians can do that. And of course, they follow dietary guidelines, which are mainly created through big food industry and big food interests. So when you look at the guidelines and the pyramid, you see what's on the bottom. They have recently changed it so that grain is no longer on the bottom of the dietary pyramid, and at least vegetables are. But still, it's very heavily influenced by big food and agriculture, which is not reasonable and it's not fair.
But aren't the dietitians in the hospitals turning around and saying, hey, listen, if you don't modify your diet, you're going to end up losing your limbs because of diabetes?
Well, I hope they are, but I don't think so, because diabetes education is not saying that. And when it comes to diabetes, the dietitians will pass all the clients along to the diabetes educator. That's the whole point of the system. And currently in Australia, diabetes education does not include the new science.
And what includes medication?
It includes hugely medication, but it also includes your standard diet of counting your carbohydrates so that you can match your insulin to the carbohydrate intake.
The old model you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, instead of reducing the amount of sugar and carbohydrate that you eat, which would mean you would need less insulin.
I'm guessing that there's almost a body of understanding out there that says that diet has very little to do with your health.
Yeah, you might have hit the nail on the head there. Do you know, when I was in training a long time ago, a very long time ago, there was this thinking that came down from the medical world, I have to say, from the medical world, that diet makes no difference and that food makes no difference. And sadly, there were a lot of doctors, and there still are a lot of doctors and medical people that think this.
So you can eat anything, shove it down your throat, and if you have any problems, we've got medication to fix it.
Yeah, that was sadly a very old way of thinking. And they didn't even go as far as to say, we'll give you medication to help offset that poor food. They just did not believe that food made a difference, full stop.
So that difficulty that you've got in your health has got nothing to do with your diet. And
yes.
So we'll just go and deal with that with medication.
Yeah. And I'm really hoping that thinking has died out. But it was very relevant 20 years ago. And sadly, I still hear echoes of it today. It's completely and utterly inappropriate and false. And there are a few still old dinosaurs out there sprouting it. But
so what's happened to this good doctor down in Tasmania? Where is he at now?
Would you believe...
Is he still sorting things out
well,
for people?
to make things even worse or more complex, so the whole thing got out of hand. So his regulatory body wouldn't give him a defining sentence, wouldn't tell him one way or the other. And so eventually we ended up having a Senate committee that actually our own Australian government convened a committee to look into this regulatory body and how they come to their decisions and their processes. It's been a complete debacle, and they have completely slammed the regulatory body, and they haven't come down yet with their findings and what they're going to suggest. But it sounds very much like they're very annoyed that this particular doctor and others, he's not the only one, have been singled out and have been harassed in this manner. And the way they see it is he's just being stopped from practicing medicine, which is the job he's employed for. Because
he's not towing the line that's been put out by Dietetics Association and his governing bodies.
Well, they're not actually saying that. They're suggesting that he is not trained to give the advice he's giving.
Even though he's a qualified doctor and surgeon, and he's got this life experience of cutting people's legs off.
Yes, the whole thing is utterly
and
as
he's
ridiculous.
Not qualified to say, eat healthier food.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Utterly amazing.
I don't get it, you know.
None of us get it, and you would think that we were living back in the 20s somewhere. It's just when you consider the consequences, I don't get it either. And it's grossly wrong.
Maybe it's a case of follow the money.
I absolutely think it is a case of follow the money, but it's also a case, I think, of it's like a turf war. So the dietitians have been guilty of this before, that they don't want anyone else to make any comments about nutrition because perhaps they see it as derailing their own agendas with nutrition. But I don't see them moving with the times fast enough. And they are moving and they are in bed with too many industrial concerns. And that really worries me.
Well, I can tell you the few times that my poor old dad's been in hospital and I've seen the meals that he's copped there and the disdain that he has for that food, I've now decided that if he goes back to hospital again, I'm going to basically supply him with all of his meals because...
Absolutely. Do you know there is actually research, and this was going back some 15 years, there was research done that showed that if a patient went into hospital and they had to have a long stay, within 6 weeks, their nutritional health was reduced by something ridiculous like 25%. just by having stayed in the hospital and depending on hospital food for a period of time, like about 6 weeks. It's disgraceful. It should be the opposite.
It's not exactly a restorative place, is it?
Definitely not, but it could be. And that's the crazy thing. It could and should be, but it's not.
Okay, so that's unfortunate for that poor doctor down there, and hopefully things are changing, and I'd love the Senate committee to bitch slap a few people, but if that's appropriate, and see what happens. So where do we go with all of this information? You've said that we've got this low carbohydrate, healthy fat diet that everybody should follow. And if you go back to previous episodes, you'll understand exactly what that means.
So what does it look like, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, you can go back to our previous episodes and listen to what we've said about eating whole foods, because essentially it's about, pretty much what your grandparents ate or what they recognised as whole foods. So again, it's coming back to the whole idea of eating foods as close to their form in nature as possible. Now, this means eating plenty of fresh vegetables, including all those dark green leafies. By including vegetables, we cover the fibre that most of us are so deficient in today. We don't eat enough foods with fibre in them, and we need the fibre essentially to keep our gut microbiome really healthy and happy. So we need plenty of fresh vegetables, plenty of good healthy fats and proteins, and that if you're not a veggie or a vegan, then you can get that from eggs and butter and avocados. We've spoken about that before, and fish and meat, etc. If you are a vegetarian or vegan, then you're going to be using your plant-based proteins, but you need your protein and you need your healthy fats. The thing about the low carbohydrate healthy fat diet is that it does not include bucket loads of grain or starchy refined flours like bread, crackers, wafers, pastries, and grains like rice, pasta, etc.
So the important little word, and it's barely a word, is low in there. What does that mean? Just so people are very clear. It's not no carbohydrate, is it?
No, it's not an elimination diet. It's a low carbohydrate diet, not a no carbohydrate diet. To have a no carbohydrate diet, actually, you'd have to become an Eskimo or something, because it's close to impossible. So as soon as you include vegetables in your diet, there is carbohydrate in your vegetables and some fruit. So you want to always still be including plenty of veggies. Use your sweet potato and other root vegetables, which will give you enough carbohydrate to create a nice moderate balanced blood glucose and insulin level. So it's about managing that level of carbohydrate. For some people, they'll need a little bit more because they do lots of activity or they're athletes. For a lot of us, we need a lot less. So you have to work that out for yourself based on how well you're feeling during the day. But the thing to remember when you're switching to this diet, make sure you include plenty of protein and fat with your meals and vegetables. So I always work on the premise of protein first, then fat, and then plenty of vegetables. And if you think about your plate in that way, you won't go wrong. So if you're trying to get into this diet, I would look at initially reducing things like your bread, your cereal, your grain, any of your soft drinks. Take out the sugar that you can take out. And do it slowly.
And that includes fruit, which is often forgotten because a lot of people, myself included, guilty as charged a year or two back, eat too much fruit.
Yeah, we do eat too much fruit, especially those really, really sweet fruits. So
and also the fruits of today have got a lot more sugar in it than they did historically.
They did. I mean, don't cut out fruit completely, and especially in the summer we enjoy some fruit. But 1 or 2 pieces is totally adequate. You really don't need any more than that per day. And eat it sitting down at night after dinner to a great big bowl of fruit salad, which a lot of my clients do thinking they're having a healthy option, is the worst thing you can do, and it will certainly affect your sleeping, etc., and your insulin levels as you go to bed. So it's a really bad idea. If you're going to eat fruit, have it earlier in the day. Don't eat it in the evening or at night. Have it earlier. Maybe that's your mid-afternoon snack or something. So it's about eating whole foods and slowly progress onto this. Just slowly start to reduce where you can see those big slugs of carbohydrate in the rice and the pasta and the bread and the cereals. Reduce them. If you want to go cold turkey, do it. But a lot of people don't like cold turkey. That's a little bit too stressful for the body. So just go slowly. Take out the obvious things first. Take out the sugar, take out the soft drink, increase your water and increase your vegetables. And once you start eating more vegetables and more fat, like avocado particularly, you'll actually find there's less room for some of those other foods.
I just on a personal story here, moved probably completely to this lifestyle 18 months ago, nearly 2 years ago, when I became a little bit more educated. And up until then, I'd had a really good diet anyway. And I've never been a huge sweet tooth. But I was still eating, like I've said before, a fair bit of fruit, and there was always bread and rice and the like. I noticed that as I was moving into my mid-50s, I was getting that real spare tyre, that middle-aged spread. And I've heard it referred to as toffee, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. But what I've found that as I've increased my exercise load and then got off all of these carbohydrates, I've actually slimmed right down. And it's really wonderful for somebody who's now getting quite old to actually, be physically relatively slim. And I think it's all down to the fact that now I have very little carbohydrates in my diet. Not none, but
yeah, instead of focusing just on your slimness, I mean, do you have more energy? Do you feel better? Do you sleep better?
Oh, definitely, all of that, all the above. And I just feel a lot better for it. And I've incorporated a fair few nuts in my diet these days instead of fruit, and that's just been an absolute boon for me.
Yeah, totally. And that brings all the good fats and proteins and minerals into our diet that we need, essentially.
Yeah. So that's the LCHF diet. Yeah.
So it wasn't as bad as you thought it was going to be.
It's still hard to say, LCHF. Oh, I'm getting used to it. I don't really understand it.
But that's what people will be looking for when they go hunting for our podcast.
Okay, well, come and tell us what you think, everybody. Would be fascinated to know if you've had some similar experiences to what I just described about myself, or maybe what you've been having a crack at to see if you can pull it around. There are plenty of ways of contacting us. One of the best, of course, is email, which is contact@carolinenutrition.com. You can also subscribe in iTunes or on your favourite podcatching app. Caroline's Twitter handle is @CJRScott, whereas mine is @IanCath. There's also a Facebook and a SoundCloud page which you can find. All of these links are available on the site at carolinenutrition.com. Drop on over. We'd love to hear from you. For those people out there who have issues with diabetes, maybe there's something in this episode that they might want to consider. I hope so, for your sake. Caroline, what are we doing next time?
Well, next time I really want to explore the idea of detoxification. We've mentioned it before, and a lot of my clients talk about it, and they'll come in and they'll actually want to get a detox diet that they can do in, say, 5 days. So let's cover the whole idea. I want to explore, is it a fad? Can we do it safely? Should we do it at all? Let's have a look at detox processes in the body and how we can use our diet to safely give our body a beautiful cleanse and help augment our detox processes.
Okay, look forward to it. Until next time, everyone, bye-bye from Ian.
And goodbye for me.
Bye.
Bye.